3 months after the crosswalk incident, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium at the local community college. The room held over 200 people, a size that would have been unimaginable to him just a year earlier. But as he looked out at the faces in the audience, he felt calm and purposeful rather than terrified. The event was called Understanding Invisible Wounds, a community conversation about veterans and mental health. Marcus had been invited as the keynote speaker, a role he had accepted after much consideration and preparation with Dr. Rodriguez. When I left for my first deployment to Afghanistan, Marcus began, his voice steady and clear, I thought I knew what courage looked like. I thought it meant running toward danger, protecting my fellow soldiers and completing missions under difficult circumstances. The audience was attentive, leaning forward to catch every word. In the front row, Marcus spotted several familiar faces. The businessman from the crosswalk who had become a regular volunteer at veteran events, the older woman whose grandson was now receiving counseling at the VA, and Tyler, the young veteran he had met in Dr. Rodriguez's waiting room. But I learned that coming home requires a different kind of courage, Marcus continued. The courage to ask for help, the courage to admit that you're struggling, the courage to keep walking forward even when people don't understand why each step is so difficult. Marcus told the story of his return from Afghanistan, his struggles with traumatic brain injury, and the long process of learning to navigate a world that had moved on without him. He talked about the isolation, the frustration, and the shame of feeling broken. For a long time, I believed that because my wounds weren't visible, they weren't real, he said. I thought I should be able to just tough it out and get back to normal. But I learned that normal is different for everyone, and that healing doesn't mean going back to who you were before. It means learning to be who you are now. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Marcus could see some people wiping away tears, while others nodded in recognition of experiences they had witnessed in their own families. 3 months ago, I had an experience that changed my perspective on sharing my story, Marcus said, his voice taking on a more personal tone. I was walking to a veterans outreach event when I fell in a crosswalk. People around me were impatient and frustrated with my pace. Some made cruel assumptions about why I was moving slowly. He paused, remembering the shame and fear he had felt that day. But then my dog tags became visible and everything changed. Suddenly, the same people who had been hostile were apologetic and respectful. They wanted to help, to understand, to make amends. Marcus reached up and touched the dog tags that now hung visibly outside his shirt, a choice he had made after that transformative day. That experience taught me something important. These tags shouldn't be required for people to treat each other with basic human dignity, but they can be a bridge to understanding. He looked directly at the businessman in the front row who smiled encouragingly. One of the people from that day is here tonight. He has become not just an advocate for veterans, but a reminder to me that people can change when they're given the opportunity to learn. The businessman stood up and addressed the audience. My name is Robert Chen, and I was one of the people who treated Marcus poorly that day. I'm ashamed of my behavior, but I'm grateful for the education it led to. Since that day, I've volunteered over 100 hours with veteran organizations, and I've learned that my impatience that morning was a reflection of my own ignorance, not Marcus's limitations. The audience applauded as Robert sat back down. Marcus nodded to him gratefully before continuing. Recovery is not a destination, Marcus said. It's a daily choice to keep moving forward. Some days are better than others. Some days I still struggle with crowds and loud noises. Some days I still walk slowly because my brain needs time to process the world around me. He gestured to Tyler in the audience. But I've also learned that our struggles can become our strength when we use them to help others. Every veteran who shares their story makes it easier for the next veteran to ask for help. Tyler raised his hand and Marcus nodded to him. Marcus helped me understand that I wasn't broken, Tyler said to the audience. He showed me that it's okay to take up space, to move at my own pace, and to ask for what I need. That conversation in a waiting room changed my life. After Tyler sat down, Marcus continued with the final part of his presentation. I want to leave you with a challenge, he said. When you encounter someone who seems to be struggling, whether they're a veteran or not, I challenge you to respond with curiosity instead of judgment. Instead of assuming someone is lazy or inconsiderate, consider that they might be fighting a battle you can't see. He clicked to his final slide, which showed a simple message. Invisible wounds are still wounds, Invisible battles are still battles. Invisible strength is still strength. Thank you for listening, Marcus concluded. And thank you for caring enough to learn. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. As it died down, the moderator opened the floor for questions. Hands shot up throughout the auditorium, and for the next hour, Marcus answered questions about PTSD, traumatic brain injury, veteran services, and how community members could better support returning service members. After the event, Marcus was surrounded by people wanting to thank him, share their own stories, or ask how they could get involved in supporting veterans. The businessman Robert approached with his teenage daughter. "This is my daughter, Sarah," Robert said. "She's starting a veteran support club at her high school because of what she learned from your story." Sarah stepped forward confidently. "Mr. Chen, thank you for helping my dad become a better person. And thank you for showing me that everyone has a story worth knowing." As the crowd gradually dispersed, Marcus found himself alone with Dr. Rodriguez, who had been in the audience throughout his presentation. "How do you feel?" she asked. Marcus considered the question. "Tired," he said honestly. "But good tired. Fulfilled tired." "You've come a long way from the man who was afraid to cross a busy street," Dr. Rodriguez observed. "I still get nervous crossing busy streets," Marcus corrected with a smile. "But now I know that my nervousness doesn't define my worth. And I know that my experience can help other people feel less alone in their nervousness." As they walked out of the auditorium together, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The crosswalk incident that had seemed like his lowest point had actually been the catalyst for discovering his voice and his purpose. His phone buzzed with a text message from Tyler. "Thank you for showing me that speaking up can change lives. I just signed up to share my story at next month's support group meeting." Marcus smiled as he read the message. The ripple effects of courage continued to spread, one conversation at a time. He had learned that healing wasn't a solo journey, and that sometimes the best way to move forward was to reach back and help someone else take their next step. As he walked to his car, Marcus moved at his own deliberate pace. A few people passed him on the sidewalk, but their hurried steps no longer made him feel ashamed. He understood now that everyone was walking their own path at their own speed, carrying their own invisible loads. The dog tags around his neck caught the evening light as he climbed into his car. They were no longer hidden symbols of shame, but visible reminders of service, sacrifice, and the ongoing courage required to heal and help others heal. Marcus had found his voice, and he would continue using it to build bridges of understanding between the invisible battles veterans fought and the visible world they returned to, one story, one conversation, one crosswalk at a time. The day of the community outreach event arrived with unexpected challenges. Marcus had woken up that morning feeling confident about volunteering at the library, but a construction crew had started work on his usual route downtown. The loud machinery and blocked sidewalks meant he had to take an unfamiliar path through the busiest part of the city. By the time Marcus reached the downtown area, his anxiety was already heightened. The unfamiliar route had disrupted his careful mental preparation, and the noise from the construction had triggered memories he preferred to keep buried. His hands were shaking more than usual as he approached the central library where the Veterans Outreach event was being held. The library sat at the intersection of two major streets, and the crosswalk leading to the main entrance was always crowded during the lunch hour. Marcus joined the group of people waiting for the light to change, trying to use his breathing techniques to calm his racing heart. When the light turned green, the crowd surged forward with typical downtown urgency. Marcus began walking at his measured pace, focusing on his steps and trying to ignore the sensory overload around him. But today, his usual coping strategies weren't working as well as they normally did. Behind him, he could hear frustrated sighs and muttered complaints. "Come on," someone said loudly. "Some of us have actual jobs to get back to." Marcus tried to step aside, but the crosswalk was too crowded and his coordination was affected by his elevated anxiety. He stumbled slightly, catching himself before falling but losing more ground in the process. "Seriously?" A voice called out much louder this time. "Move faster. You're holding up everyone behind you." Marcus turned to see a group of office workers in business suits, their faces showing clear irritation. One man was checking his watch repeatedly, while a woman was speaking loudly into her phone about being late for a meeting. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly, trying to increase his pace. But the faster he tried to move, the more his balance was affected. The stress was making his traumatic brain injury symptoms worse, creating a cycle he couldn't break out of. "This is ridiculous," the man with the watch said to his colleagues. "Look at this guy. He's probably on drugs or something. Just stumbling around, blocking traffic." The woman on the phone lowered her device and addressed Marcus directly. "Excuse me, but you need to move faster or get out of the way. People have places to be." Marcus felt his face burning with shame and frustration. He wanted to explain, but the words wouldn't come. His throat felt tight, and his vision was starting to blur around the edges, signs that he was approaching a panic attack. "Maybe he's drunk," suggested another person in the group. "It's not even noon yet." The comments were getting louder and more cruel, attracting attention from other pedestrians. Marcus felt trapped in the middle of the crosswalk, unable to move faster but also unable to escape the growing circle of judgment around him. "Hey, buddy," the man with the watch called out, now directly behind Marcus. "Move it or lose it. Some of us have real responsibilities." In his desperation to get away from the confrontation, Marcus stumbled again. This time he fell to one knee on the asphalt. His backpack slipped from his shoulder and the contents scattered across the crosswalk. The group of office workers stopped walking, their annoyance now mixed with reluctant concern. "Oh, great," the woman muttered. "Now he's down on the ground." Marcus scrambled to collect his belongings, his hands shaking violently. Among the scattered items were his appointment cards from the VA, his medication bottles, and his worn leather journal. But as he reached for his backpack, the chain around his neck caught on the zipper and pulled free from under his shirt. His dog tags dangled in full view, the metal catching the sunlight as they swayed back and forth. The identification tags clearly displayed his name, service number, and blood type, along with the words U.S. Army stamped in bold letters. The change in the crowd's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. The man who had been checking his watch stopped mid-complaint, his mouth falling open as he read the tags. The woman lowered her phone completely, her aggressive posture softening into something approaching shame. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "He's a veteran." The businessman who had been most vocal about Marcus's slow pace took a step back, his face flushing red. I didn't know. I'm sorry, I didn't realize." An older woman who had been watching from the sidewalk pushed through the crowd. "Let me help you up, son," she said gently, extending her hand to Marcus. "Take your time." Marcus accepted her help, getting back to his feet while clutching his dog tags. The crowd that had been so hostile just moments before now stood in awkward silence, their impatience replaced by embarrassment and recognition. "Are you okay?" asked a young man who hadn't been part of the original complaining group. "Do you need medical attention?" Marcus shook his head, still trying to catch his breath. "I'm fine. I need a moment." The businessman who had been most aggressive approached cautiously. "Sir, I owe you an apology. I had no idea you were military. Thank you for your service." "You shouldn't need to see these to treat someone with basic human decency," Marcus said quietly, holding up his dog tags. "But thank you." The woman who had been complaining about her meeting put her phone away entirely. "You're absolutely right. I'm ashamed of how I acted. Is there anything we can do to help?" Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding him. The same people who had been cruel and impatient just minutes before were now showing concern and respect. It was a stark demonstration of how quickly perceptions could change when hidden truths were revealed. "I'm walking to the library," Marcus said. "There's a veterans outreach event there today. If you really want to help, maybe you could learn about what veterans go through when they come home." Several people nodded seriously. The older woman who had helped him up said, "I'll be there. My grandson just returned from overseas and I'm trying to understand what he's going through." As the crowd began to disperse, people continued to approach Marcus with apologies and offers of assistance. The businessman insisted on helping him collect the rest of his scattered belongings. "Can I ask?" the man said quietly as he handed Marcus his journal. "What happened to you over there? If you don't mind me asking." Marcus considered the question. A month ago he would have been too overwhelmed to respond, but his work with Dr. Rodriguez and his experience at the support group had given him tools to handle these conversations. "Traumatic brain injury from an explosion," Marcus explained. "It affects my balance and coordination. That's why I walk slowly. My brain needs more time to process everything around me." The businessman nodded, listening intently. "I never would have guessed. You look perfectly normal. That's the thing about invisible wounds, Marcus said. They're invisible, but they're very real. By the time Marcus reached the library, word had somehow spread about the incident at the crosswalk. Several of the people from the crowd had followed him there, genuinely interested in learning about veteran issues. Janet from the support group greeted him at the information table. "Marcus, I heard about what happened outside. Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," Marcus said, looking around at the unexpected attendees who had come because of the crosswalk encounter. "I think I just found my voice." For the rest of the afternoon, Marcus shared his story with dozens of people who stopped by the veterans table. Each conversation was an opportunity to educate someone about the challenges veterans face and the importance of compassion for invisible disabilities. The incident that had started as his worst nightmare had become an unexpected chance to fulfill his purpose, helping others understand what it really meant to come home from war. 2 weeks after his conversation with the Korean War veteran, Marcus found himself standing outside the community center where the veteran support group met. The building was old but well-maintained, with large windows that let in plenty of natural light. A small sign by the entrance read, "Veterans Welcome Here," in simple block letters. Marcus had driven to the meeting 3 times over the past week, each time sitting in his car for 20 minutes before driving home. Today, he had made a promise to Dr. Rodriguez that he would at least go inside, even if he didn't speak. The meeting room was smaller than he had expected, with about 15 folding chairs arranged in a circle. 7 veterans had already arrived, ranging in age from their early 20s to their 70s. A coffee station was set up in one corner, and the walls were decorated with flags from different military branches. A woman with short gray hair and a warm smile approached Marcus as he hesitated in the doorway. "You must be Marcus," she said. "I'm Janet, the group facilitator. Dr. Rodriguez told me you might join us today." Marcus nodded, his mouth feeling dry. "I'm not sure about speaking yet." "No pressure at all," Janet assured him. "Today is just about listening and getting comfortable. Would you like some coffee?" Marcus accepted a cup of coffee and found a seat near the back of the circle. As more veterans arrived, he noticed the diversity of their appearances and ages. Some wore clothing that identified them as veterans, while others, like himself, showed no obvious signs of their military service. The meeting began with introductions. Each person shared their name, their branch of service, and one word describing how they felt that day. When it was Marcus's turn, he simply said, "Marcus, Army." Nervous. Several people smiled understandingly, and a woman across the circle mouthed the words, "Me too." The featured speaker was a Vietnam veteran named Robert, who had been attending the group for 5 years. He talked about his journey from isolation and anger to finding purpose in helping other veterans. His story was raw and honest, touching on themes Marcus recognized from his own experience. "I used to think that because my wounds weren't visible, they weren't real," Robert said. "I thought I should just tough it out, get over it, move on. But trauma isn't something you get over, it's something you learn to carry." Marcus found himself nodding along with Robert's words. The man described the frustration of being misunderstood by civilians, the challenge of readjusting to a world that had moved on without him, and the slow process of rebuilding his identity beyond being a soldier. "The turning point for me," Robert continued, "was when I realized that my experience could help someone else, that the pain I had been through could have meaning if I used it to reach out to another veteran who was struggling." After Robert finished speaking, Janet opened the floor for discussion. Several group members shared their own experiences and thanked Robert for his honesty. The conversation was supportive and non-judgmental, very different from what Marcus had expected. A young Marine named David raised his hand. "I've been coming here for 2 months, and I still don't know how to talk to my family about what I'm going through. They keep asking when I'm going to be normal again." Marcus felt a strong urge to respond. David's situation reminded him so much of his own struggles with his parents' expectations. Before he could second-guess himself, Marcus found himself speaking. "I struggled with that too," Marcus said, his voice quiet but steady. "My parents wanted their old son back, and I didn't know how to tell them that person didn't exist anymore." The room was attentive, encouraging him to continue. "It took me a long time to understand that I wasn't broken," Marcus went on. "I was changed, and that change wasn't necessarily a bad thing, even though it felt like it at the time." David leaned forward in his chair. "How did you help your family understand?" Marcus thought about his parents, who had struggled for over a year to accept his new limitations and needs. Slowly, he said, I started by explaining that healing doesn't mean going back to who I was before. It means learning to be who I am now. What about the practical stuff? Asked another veteran. Like when people get impatient because you move slowly or need more time to process things? This question hit close to home for Marcus. That's something I deal with every day, he admitted. I walk slower than I used to because my brain needs more time to process everything around me. People notice, and some of them get frustrated. He paused, thinking about all the encounters he'd had with impatient strangers. I used to let their reactions define how I felt about myself. But my therapist helped me understand that their impatience says more about them than it does about me. A woman named Sarah spoke up. Do you ever tell people you're a veteran when they seem frustrated with you? Marcus shook his head. Not usually. I don't feel like I should have to justify my existence to strangers. But sometimes I wonder if people would be more understanding if they knew. Janet nodded thoughtfully. That's an interesting point, Marcus. Some veterans find it helpful to share their status when they're comfortable doing so. Others prefer to keep it private. There's no right or wrong approach. As the meeting continued, Marcus found himself participating more in the discussion. The environment felt safe and supportive, very different from his fears about judgment and misunderstanding. Near the end of the session, Janet made an announcement. Next month, we're planning a community outreach event at the downtown library. We'll be sharing information about veteran services and resources. We're looking for volunteers to help staff the table and share their experiences with community members. Marcus felt his chest tighten at the thought of speaking to the general public, but he also felt a spark of interest. The morning's discussion had shown him that his voice could make a difference for other veterans. After the meeting ended, several group members approached Marcus to thank him for sharing. David, the young Marine, shook his hand and said, What you said about being changed instead of broken, that really helped me. Robert, the Vietnam veteran who had spoken earlier, clapped Marcus on the shoulder. You have a gift for connecting with people, he said. Have you ever thought about speaking publicly about your experiences? Marcus smiled. Actually, yes. My therapist has been encouraging me to consider it. Well, when you're ready, this group could use more voices like yours. As Marcus drove home from the meeting, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. A sense of purpose beyond his own healing. The conversation with David had reminded him that his struggles could have meaning if they helped someone else feel less alone. When he got home, Marcus pulled out the card Dr. Rodriguez had given him with information about the community outreach event. For the first time, the idea of speaking publicly didn't seem impossible. It still scared him, but it also excited him. He thought about Robert's words about trauma being something you learn to carry rather than something you get over. Marcus was learning to carry his experiences in a way that could help others carry theirs. That night, Marcus wrote in his journal for the first time in weeks. Today I spoke to other veterans about my experience, he wrote. It felt good to use my voice for something meaningful. Maybe Dr. Rodriguez is right about sharing my story more widely. Maybe my experience can help people understand what invisible wounds really mean. He closed the journal and looked at his reflection in the bedroom mirror. The dog tags around his neck caught the light for a moment, reminding him of the weight they carried. But for the first time in years, that weight felt like something he could share rather than something he had to bear alone. Dr. Rodriguez's office was a sanctuary of calm in the bustling VA building. Soft lighting replaced the harsh fluorescence of the hallways, and the walls were painted in soothing earth tones. Plants sat on the windowsill, their green leaves catching the afternoon sunlight. A small fountain in the corner provided a gentle trickling sound that helped mask the noise from the street below. Marcus settled into his usual chair, a comfortable leather recliner that had become familiar over the past 2 years. Dr. Rodriguez sat across from him, her notebook balanced on her lap, but her attention focused entirely on him. How was the walk here today? She asked, her voice warm and encouraging. Marcus thought about the impatient businessman, the jogging woman, and the encounter with Tyler in the waiting room. Challenging, he said, but I made it. Tell me about the challenging parts. Marcus described the crosswalk encounters, the way people moved around him with visible irritation. Dr. Rodriguez listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making small notes. And how did you handle their reactions? She asked. Better than last month, Marcus admitted. I didn't let it ruin my whole day. I just kept walking. That's significant progress, Marcus. 6 months ago, those encounters would have sent you home for the rest of the day. Marcus knew she was right. In the early days after his return, any sign of impatience or judgment from strangers would trigger a spiral of shame and anger that could last for days. He would isolate himself, convinced that he was broken beyond repair. I met another veteran in your waiting room, Marcus continued. A young guy named Tyler. Just back 6 months. Dr. Rodriguez's expression became more attentive. How did that interaction go? Good, I think. He reminded me of myself when I first started coming here. Angry, defensive, convinced nothing could help. Marcus paused, remembering Tyler's flat voice and distant stare. His parents were frustrated. They want their old son back. And what did you tell him? That it gets different, not easier. That feeling broken and being broken aren't the same thing. Marcus smiled slightly. I think I was quoting you. Dr. Rodriguez returned the smile. You've internalized those concepts well. How did it feel to be in the helper role instead of the one seeking help? Marcus considered this. Strange. Good, but strange. I don't usually think of myself as someone who has answers. But you do have answers, Marcus. Different answers than you had 3 years ago, but valuable ones. Your experience has meaning. They spent the next 30 minutes working through breathing exercises and discussing Marcus's progress with exposure. Therapy. Dr. Rodriguez had been gradually helping him tackle more challenging environments, starting with quiet coffee shops and progressing to busier spaces like shopping centers and downtown streets. I want to talk about something that might seem unrelated, Dr. Rodriguez said as the session neared its end. Have you given any thought to the suggestion I made last month about sharing your story? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Dr. Rodriguez had mentioned the possibility of him speaking to groups about his experiences, perhaps at veteran support meetings or community events. The idea terrified him. I'm not a public speaker, Marcus said. I can barely handle walking down a busy street without people getting impatient with me. You spoke to Tyler today without any preparation. You helped him feel less alone. That's exactly what public speaking would be, just with a few more people. A few more people? Marcus laughed nervously. Dr. Rodriguez, I panic in grocery stores. How am I supposed to stand in front of a room full of strangers? We would start small, she said patiently. Maybe 5 or 6 people. Other veterans who are struggling with similar issues. People who would understand your perspective. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The idea of sharing his story publicly brought up a mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to help others like Tyler, but another part was terrified of being judged or misunderstood. What would I even say? He asked finally. You would tell your truth. You would talk about the challenges you've faced and the progress you've made. You would let other veterans know that they're not alone in their struggles. What if I have a panic attack in the middle of talking? Then we'll have a plan for that. We'll practice relaxation techniques. We'll have safe words and exit strategies. And remember, Marcus, the people you'd be speaking to would understand if you needed a break. As the session ended, Dr. Rodriguez handed Marcus a small card. This is information about a veteran support group that meets next week. They're looking for someone to share their story. You don't have to decide today, but think about it. Marcus pocketed the card without looking at it. The idea still seemed impossible, but he trusted Dr. Rodriguez's judgment. She had guided him through many seemingly impossible challenges over the past 2 years. Leaving the building, Marcus decided to take a different route home. Instead of the busy downtown streets, he would walk through Riverside Park. The park paths were wider and less crowded, and the natural setting helped calm his mind. As he walked along the river, Marcus encountered an elderly man sitting on a bench feeding pigeons. The man wore a baseball cap with military insignia that Marcus recognized as Korean War era. Beautiful day, the elderly man said as Marcus approached. Yes, sir, it is, Marcus replied, slowing his pace. You have the look of a soldier, the man observed. What branch? Army, 3 deployments to Afghanistan. The elderly man nodded knowingly. Tough war. All wars are tough, but that one's been going on so long. When did you get back? 3 years ago. And how are you adjusting? It was a simple question, but Marcus appreciated that the man asked directly, instead of assuming everything was fine. Some days are better than others, Marcus answered honestly. That's the truth of it, the elderly man said. I've been back from Korea for 60 years and some days are still better than others. But you know what I learned? Marcus sat down on the bench beside him. What's that? The hard days make you appreciate the good ones more. And the experience, as difficult as it is, gives you something valuable to offer others who are struggling. The elderly man pulled out a worn photograph from his wallet. It showed a group of young soldiers in Korea, their faces serious but determined. I lost some good friends over there. For years I thought the best way to honor them was to forget, to move on. But I was wrong. He pointed to one of the faces in the photograph. That's Jimmy Rodriguez. Best friend I ever had. He didn't make it home. And you know what honors him? When I talk to other veterans who are struggling, when I share what I learned about surviving and healing, that keeps his memory alive in a way that helps people. Marcus studied the photograph, seeing the youth and hope in those faces. Do you ever speak publicly about your experiences? Every month at the VFW Hall. Started about 10 years ago when I met a young veteran from Iraq who was having a hard time. Reminded me of myself when I first came back. The elderly man looked at Marcus carefully. You thinking about sharing your story? My therapist suggested it. But the idea scares me. Good. It should scare you. The stories that matter are the ones that cost us something to tell. But the people who need to hear them, they're worth the cost. The elderly man stood up, scattering the remaining breadcrumbs for the pigeons. Take your time deciding, son. But remember, your voice matters. Your experience has value, and there are people out there who need to know they're not alone. As Marcus watched the elderly veteran walk away, he felt the card from Dr. Rodriguez in his pocket. Maybe speaking publicly wasn't as impossible as he had thought. Maybe it was just another kind of crossing the street, taking it one careful step at a time. The Veterans Affairs building stood before Marcus like a fortress of glass and steel. Its modern design was meant to be welcoming, but to him it still felt institutional and cold. He paused at the entrance, watching other veterans come and go. Some walked with visible injuries, using canes or wheelchairs. Others, like himself, carried invisible wounds that were harder for the world to see and understand. Marcus pushed through the revolving door and approached the security checkpoint. The guard, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, smiled as he approached. Good morning, sir. How can I help you today? I have an appointment with Dr. Rodriguez, Marcus replied, pulling out his identification card. His hand still trembled slightly, a side effect of his medication that he had learned to live with. The guard glanced at the card and then looked up at Marcus with recognition. You're one of Dr. Rodriguez's patients. She's excellent. My son works with her, too. The guard's voice carried a tone of understanding that Marcus rarely heard from strangers. After passing through security, Marcus made his way to the elevator. The waiting area was filled with other veterans, each carrying their own stories of service and sacrifice. An older man with a Vietnam War cap sat reading a newspaper. A young woman about Marcus's age stared out the window, her prosthetic leg clearly visible. A man in his 50s paced nervously near the reception desk. Marcus found an empty chair in a quieter corner and sat down to wait. The appointment was still 20 minutes away, but arriving early helped him manage his anxiety. He pulled out a small notebook from his backpack and began writing, a coping strategy Dr. Rodriguez had taught him. Today I walked downtown, he wrote. People seemed impatient with my pace again. I managed the crosswalk without panic. Small victory. Writing helped him process his experiences and track his progress even when that progress felt impossibly slow. A commotion near the elevator caught his attention. A family had arrived, clearly upset and arguing in hushed tones. The mother was crying while the father spoke angrily to a staff member. Between them stood a young man who looked to be in his early 20s wearing a military uniform. His left arm was in a sling, and his face bore the distant look Marcus recognized in himself. He's not the same, the mother was saying through her tears. He came back different and nobody seems to understand. The doctors keep saying he's fine physically, but he's not fine. He won't talk to us. He won't leave his room. The young soldier stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight. Marcus could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like he was ready for battle even in this safe space. It was a posture Marcus knew well from his own early days after returning home. The father's voice grew louder despite his attempt to whisper. We've been waiting for months for this appointment, months. And now you're telling us the doctor is running behind? My son served his country and this is how he gets treated. Marcus felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. The family's pain was raw and real, and it reminded him of his own parents' struggle to understand what he had been through. When he first came home, they had expected him to simply pick up where he left off. They couldn't comprehend why simple tasks had become so difficult, why crowds made him panic, why he couldn't sleep through the night. The staff member, a woman with graying hair and a patient expression, spoke calmly to the family. "I understand your frustration and I'm sorry for the delay. Combat-related trauma is complex and healing takes time. Your son's appointment with Dr. Rodriguez will happen today, I promise you that." The young soldier finally spoke, his voice flat and emotionless. "I don't need fixing. I just need everyone to leave me alone." His mother reached for his good arm, but he pulled away. "Honey, we're just trying to help." "You can't help," he replied. "Nobody can help. This is just how things are now." Marcus closed his notebook and stood up. He walked slowly toward the family, his movements deliberate and careful. The young soldier noticed him approaching and tensed up, as if expecting confrontation. "Excuse me," Marcus said quietly to the young man. "I couldn't help but overhear. I'm Marcus." He didn't extend his hand, understanding that unexpected physical contact could be triggering. The soldier studied Marcus's face, taking in the familiar signs of someone who had seen combat. "Tyler," he replied after a moment. "How long have you been back?" Marcus asked. 6 months, Tyler answered. "You?" 3 years. Tyler's expression shifted slightly, showing the first hint of curiosity. "Does it get easier?" Marcus considered the question carefully. It was one he had asked himself countless times. "Different," he said finally. "It gets different. Some days are harder, some are easier, but you learn to navigate it." Tyler's parents watched the exchange with a mixture of hope and confusion. They had been trying to reach their son for months, and here was a stranger having a real conversation with him in under 2 minutes. "The walking helps," Marcus continued, "even when people get impatient with how slow you move. Even when they don't understand. It helps to keep moving forward and let people stare," Tyler said. "They see the uniform and expect you to be some kind of hero. But I don't feel like a hero. I feel broken." Marcus nodded. "I used to feel that way too. Still do some days. But Dr. Rodriguez helped me understand that feeling broken and being broken are 2 different things. You're not broken, Tyler. You're adapting to carrying weight that most people never have to carry." A voice called out from across the waiting area. "Marcus Chen?" Marcus turned to see Dr. Rodriguez standing near her office door. She was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through people's defenses. "That's your doctor?" Tyler asked. "Yeah, she's good. Really good. She gets it." Marcus looked back at Tyler. "The appointment you're waiting for? It's worth it. Even when it feels pointless, even when talking about it hurts, it's worth it." Tyler's mother stepped forward. "Thank you," she whispered to Marcus. "This is the most he's talked to anyone since he came home." Marcus gave her a small nod. "The road is long, but he's not walking it alone. None of us are." As Marcus walked toward Dr. Rodriguez's office, he heard Tyler call out behind him. "Marcus, thanks." Marcus raised his hand in acknowledgement but didn't turn around. Some conversations were meant to be brief, but their impact could last much longer. He had learned that small moments of connection between veterans could be more powerful than hours of therapy with someone who had never experienced combat. Dr. Rodriguez smiled as he approached. "Ready for today's session?" "Ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied, and for the first time that morning he truly meant it. Marcus Chen stood at the crosswalk, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the worn leather strap of his backpack. The morning sun cast long shadows across the busy downtown street, and the familiar sounds of car horns and chattering pedestrians filled the air. To anyone watching, he looked like just another person waiting for the light to change, but inside his mind, the world was a very different place. The light turned green, and the crowd around him surged forward like water breaking through a dam. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped into the crosswalk, but his pace was deliberate and slow. Each step required concentration, as if he was walking through thick mud instead of on solid pavement. His eyes constantly scanned left and right, a habit he couldn't shake even 3 years after coming home. Behind him, a businessman in an expensive suit huffed impatiently. "Come on, man," the businessman muttered under his breath. "Some of us have places to be." Marcus heard the comment but didn't turn around. He had learned to ignore such remarks, though they still stung each time. The businessman stepped around him, shooting an annoyed glance as he passed. Marcus continued at his steady pace, counting his steps silently. 1, 2, 3, 4. The counting helped keep his mind focused on the present moment instead of drifting to places he didn't want to go. As he reached the middle of the crosswalk, a young woman with bright blue hair jogged up behind him. She wore running shoes and workout clothes, clearly on her morning exercise routine. "Excuse me," she said, slightly breathless. When Marcus didn't immediately move aside, she spoke louder. "Excuse me, sir. I'm trying to get through." Marcus stepped slightly to the right, but his pace remained the same. The woman frowned and jogged around him, muttering something about people who don't pay attention. Marcus watched her disappear into the crowd on the other side of the street. He understood their frustration, even if they didn't understand his situation. The truth was, Marcus moved slowly for reasons that weren't visible to the casual observer. 3 years ago, he had been Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, serving his 3rd deployment in Afghanistan. He had been strong, quick, and confident. He could run 5 miles without breaking a sweat and carry a full pack of gear through the mountains for hours. But that was before the explosion that changed everything. The blast had happened on a routine patrol. Marcus and his squad were checking on a village school when the improvised explosive device detonated. The physical wounds had healed mostly well, leaving only a few scars that could be hidden under clothing. But the invisible wounds ran much deeper. The traumatic brain injury had affected his balance and coordination. Simple tasks that once came naturally now required intense concentration. More challenging than the physical effects was the constant state of alertness his mind maintained. Every loud noise made him jump. Crowded places felt overwhelming. His brain remained locked in survival mode, always scanning for threats that weren't there. Walking slowly wasn't a choice. It was a necessity for managing the sensory overload that threatened to overwhelm him in busy environments. As Marcus finally reached the other side of the crosswalk, he paused to catch his breath. The short walk had left him feeling drained, though he tried not to show it. He pulled out his phone to check the time. He was running late for his appointment at the Veterans Affairs office, but rushing would only make things worse. His therapist had taught him that accepting his limitations was part of the healing process. A group of teenagers approached the same crosswalk from the opposite direction. They were laughing and talking loudly, their voices carrying over the street noise. Marcus recognized the carefree energy he had once possessed. It seemed like a lifetime ago when his biggest worry was whether he would pass his next physical fitness test. One of the teenagers, a tall boy with a baseball cap, noticed Marcus standing near the crosswalk. "You okay, dude?" the boy asked. His tone was genuinely concerned, unlike the impatient commuters from earlier. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you for asking." He appreciated the kindness, even though he couldn't explain that fine was a relative term these days. The light changed again, and Marcus prepared for another crossing. This time he would need to navigate through an even busier intersection to reach the VA building. He took another deep breath and stepped forward, knowing that more impatient strangers would likely cross his path. As he walked, Marcus thought about his upcoming appointment. His counselor, Dr. Rodriguez, had been working with him on managing public spaces and dealing with the judgment of others. She often reminded him that his service meant something, even if people on the street couldn't see it. The dog tags that hung around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt, were a reminder of the years he had dedicated to protecting others. But those dog tags also carried weight beyond their physical metal. They represented memories of friends lost, missions accomplished, and sacrifices made. They were a connection to a part of himself that felt both distant and ever-present. Some days Marcus wondered if he would ever feel like that confident soldier again. Other days he was grateful just to make it through simple tasks like crossing the street. The morning sun climbed higher as Marcus continued his journey through the downtown area. Each step was a small victory. Each intersection successfully navigated was progress. He had learned to measure success in smaller increments now. Making it to appointments on time was an achievement. Handling crowds without panic attacks was a win. Sleeping through the night without nightmares was a celebration. Behind him, the flow of impatient pedestrians continued, each person focused on their own destination and timeline. They couldn't know that the slow-moving man ahead of them had once carried wounded soldiers to safety, or that his deliberate pace was the result of serving his country. But Marcus was learning that their understanding wasn't required for him to continue moving forward, one careful step at a time.